Jamahal Hill versus Jiri Prochazka, Henry Cejudo calls out Merab Dvalishvili, and Tom Aspinall versus Marcin Tybura will be the main event of the London card in July. I'm going to go through all of these fights that have been announced and many more as well on today's MMA News reaction video. Let's start straight away with the biggest of all of them, Jamahal Hill versus Jiri Prochazka. This is a massive matchup. Jamahal Hill said, this is per Jamahal Hill, this little bit of news, that this is going to be targeted for UFC 292 on the 19th of August. If they could pull off a card with this as the main event and then Sterling versus O'Malley as the co-main event, take my money, the card doesn't really need anything else. But this is a massive matchup in the light heavyweight division, and we need this right now because I feel like people aren't seeing Jamahal Hill as the champion yet. And there is reason for that, of course. He didn't take the belt from the champion that was Jiri Prochazka at the time. I know Jiri Prochazka had to vacate, and then they ended up doing Jamahal Hill versus Glover Teixeira on the January card. And I know that Glover Teixeira was beating Jiri Prochazka, and Jamahal Hill absolutely dismantled Glover Teixeira. But you've got to admit, there is a kind of feeling like, okay, this will be where Jamahal Hill or Jiri Prochazka become champion for the first time. Or not really in the case of Jiri Prochazka, but this will be the official kind of unification bout in the light heavyweight division. And I feel like Jiri is going to get slept. I really feel like Jiri Prochazka is going to get slept by Jamahal Hill. I don't see it happening many other ways here. I know Jiri is really good, but he gets hit a lot in fights. He always gets hit on the chin. He always gets hurt. It ends up happening in most of his bouts. It even happened against Volkan Ozdemir as well. He was doing good early on, got caught on the chin by Volkan, was having a little bit of trouble with his range, and then eventually found it in the second round and got a brutal finish. We saw this with Dominic Reyes as well. He was doing good. He was charging down Dominic Reyes, but he kept getting hit on the chin. He took a lot of them, but eventually he got wobbled. He had to shoot a bad takedown, and then he got KO'd by an up kick for a second, and then woke up on top of Dominic Reyes on the ground and recovered. He got rocked multiple times by Glover Teixeira as well and dropped by him at one point in their fight, even hurt in the 5th round. If that happens against Jamahal Hill, I'm worried that he might not just be able to light heavyweight Tony Ferguson his way through it. You know what I'm saying? It's a very risky game plan and style to have in the heavier weight classes, and maybe he is that savage that's going to be able to pull off that type of style. But Jamahal Hill's going to have a ton of confidence. He just beat Glover Teixeira. He knows it's going to be a stand-up matchup, which is what he wants because he is a striker first. I doubt anyone's really going to be shooting a takedown in this matchup. And I feel like Jamahal Hill is going to be able to land a counter shot on Jiri Prochazka. I see a lot of people saying people really counting out Jamahal Hill. Everybody dismissing Hill's chances. Like, no one is. I feel like, I don't know, there are some people that are going to pick Jiri Prochazka to win, of course, but a lot of people are leaning towards Jamahal Hill in this matchup. And I think he's going to catch Jiri on the feet because although Jiri is a really fun style to watch and he's absolutely mental, there are some problems in his striking game. And I don't see those problems getting better after recovering from a really bad shoulder injury. The man probably hasn't been training or improving over this time. He's just been trying to get back to who he was before. And I don't think that who he was before can beat a guy like Jamahal Hill, who throughout this entire time, I know he likes to eat and get a little bit fat in between fights, I get it, but is going to be improving throughout this time. He didn't have injuries after the Glover Teixeira fight. He was looking to go back and get back in the cage a lot quicker, but he had to wait for Jiri Prochazka, and now I guess it's going to be taking place in August in Boston, which is an amazing fight, amazing location. I just feel like Jiri Prochazka, what he does, and I've mentioned this before, is he dips his head movement offensively and then loops up hooks like around people's arms, over their shots that they've just thrown, over their shoulders, and he'll like dip and then land shots over the top with these hooks that are really well turned over, and he has really long arms, so he can get away with throwing them from like different angles that others probably couldn't. But when he does that, man, he throws these looping shots over the top of others, and he slips offensively with his head movement. But Jamahal Hill throws a really nasty lead hook. A really nasty lead hook. Really nasty. And he doesn't really show it off too much. It's not like there's a big wind up for it, if you know what I'm saying. Like he'll just really nicely tuck it in, and it may even look like a straight punch. So what I could see happening is Jiri going mental, front kicks to the body on Jamahal Hill, landing some good shots, Jamahal Hill recovering, sort of like easing out the chaos early on in the first few minutes, sticking out a jab the entire time, and then eventually when Jiri starts to dip on the outside or inside of his jab, he's going to throw a tidy check hook on the chin of Jiri Prochazka, and Prochazka's maybe going to think it's a jab, it's coming off the lead hand, and he's going to dip into it and get rocked badly, and then finished off afterwards. I can really see it happening, man. You know what I mean? I know, like, you can say, oh, Jamahal Hill lost to Paul Craig. Well, Jiri lost to King Mo. And I know that was after he had, like, a really long, grueling fight with Vadim Nemkov before, and he has got a win over Vadim Nemkov, but at the same time, it's like, man, how that game plan eventually isn't going to work. And although I do see a lot of ways to beat Jamahal Hill, I think Jiri isn't the one to do it. I think you're going to have to be a technical striker and take things slow and chop at Jamahal Hill at range and then eventually break him down. Jiri's going to try and go straight into him, straight into his power punches to land his own. And I feel like Jamahal Hill's timing's going to be a bit better because he's got more momentum. That's who I'm going for. Jamahal Hill in that matchup, but a great matchup nevertheless. We move on to another fight announcement on another bit of interaction on social media. So Henry Cejudo retires from MMA pretty much. He doesn't do it officially, but he basically gives what seems like a retirement speech after losing to Aljamain Sterling. And then just a day afterwards, which is something I really actually rate him for, he goes on Twitter and he calls out Merab Dvalishvili, and I'm going to find the tweets that he actually said now. But he just starts calling out Merab on Twitter, which is so epic of him. You know what I mean? Because I thought maybe he was going to look towards a Holloway fight, or maybe look towards this as a matchup, or that as a matchup, who knows? But he's looking towards Merab Dvalishvili on Twitter. I actually can't find the tweet right now, but I'm fairly certain he called out Merab on Twitter, like immediately afterwards, you know what I mean? So he's looking for Merab. Here it is here. This ish is far from over. Dana White, I want Merab Dvalishvili's head on a plate. UFC Boston. And if that's going to be at the same card as Jamahal Hill versus Jiri Prochazka, and also Sterling versus O'Malley, what an amazing card that could end up being in August in Boston. That could be an amazing card. Jamahal Hill, Jiri Prochazka in the main event, Sterling O'Malley in the co-main event. That's when they're targeting it for. They've also got now Henry Cejudo, Merab Dvalishvili as a potential fight on the main card. They could add a few other fights in there as well, a Calvin Kattar versus an Edson Barboza, and just another regular matchup on that card at some point. That would be an amazing card. I need a good pay-per-view card because these next two aren't looking too good. But I want to talk about Cejudo versus Merab as a matchup because I think he could beat him, but I wouldn't pick him to. But I don't mind his chances beating him because, again, he is an Olympian wrestler. So he is going to be able to stuff the takedowns of Merab, but let's be honest, who can't stuff the takedowns of Merab? It's not about stuffing the takedowns. It's about, can you stuff 50 of them in 15 minutes? That's what it is with Merab. And can you do enough between the time that you're stuffing the takedowns to actually win a fight with a guy who's just failing 100% of his takedowns on you, but constantly shooting those takedowns over and over again because his cardio is unlike anyone we've ever seen in UFC history, which is absolutely ridiculous. Everyone gasses out shooting takedowns other than Merab. I'm not claiming EPO, but everyone gasses if they fail takedowns. This dude literally fails one per minute or one every 30 seconds, which is absolutely crazy. But he's got a ridiculous pace, and I think he'll be able to put that on Cejudo, especially in a 5-rounder. But in a 3-rounder, where Cejudo knows he's got 3 rounds to work, he might be able to empty out the gas tank a little bit sooner, because you could see him in the Aljo fight. I don't know if you guys were noticing this. He was really breathing heavy on the stall, and he seemed like every round he kind of wanted to win whilst exerting as little energy as possible. It seemed like that's what Cejudo wanted to do. He wanted to win the fight, but also keep his cardio just in case they went into the later rounds. And he seemed very aware of that in the fight. Whereas in a 3-rounder, I think he realizes, I'll shake this guy's takedowns off and go for the KO on him. You know what I mean? I'll force a KO on him, get in the clinch. He's shorter than Merab, which is very good for Henry Cejudo because it's going to help him in some of those scrambles along with his Olympic wrestling skills. I think he has a decent chance. I would pick Merab to win, but this is good from Cejudo because he wants to be on the same card as Sterling versus O'Malley in case anything goes wrong and Sterling has to pull out after a quick turnaround. Who knows? And then he steps in versus O'Malley and gets a chance at redemption against Sterling. Who knows? So he wants to be on the card for that. But what does Corey Sandhagen do? That's the problem. You know what I mean? What does Corey Sandhagen do in this instance? I guess he fights a Rob Font, maybe waits for Yan to get a win if he does, and then rematches Yan. It just leaves Sandhagen without a clear path towards his own title shot, which he arguably deserves with one extra fight. But we'll see what they do. I don't mind this fight. I would want this. Cejudo versus Merab, great matchup. I'd pick Merab, but I'm glad that Cejudo's looking to get back in there because I feel like I'd miss him if he was gone now. I want to see a few more out of him. We move on to another bit of news that got announced, which was Tom Aspinall versus Marcin Tybura, the main event of UFC London, UFC Fight Night London on the 22nd of July. A bit of a L main event, I'm going to be honest with you guys. There could be better main events for UFC London. Not that I can think of, but like there could have been like an Arnold Allen matchup, but of course he just went 5 rounds with Holloway. There could have been a Pimlet, not as a main event, but against the right opponent. I wouldn't have minded like a Pimlet Tony Ferguson main event, but Tom Aspinall's a top heavyweight contender. Pimlet's injured. The UFC London card is getting stacked with some decent fights, to be fair. But it's going to take some sort of... We got a lot of fighters injured in the UK, or they've just fought for 5 rounds. They've just had a matchup. Leon Edwards fought in March, of course. I don't think he'll be ready to fight in July. He mentioned that he wanted to come back in September or October. So Tom Aspinall's the man for the job. Now, I did think they weren't going to go with Marcin Tybura because... I thought, okay, main event, UFC London, they have to make a big splash because it's a huge event every time they do it. They're probably going to do Tom Aspinall versus Tai Tuivasa. I think now that they know Jones is going to be gone and Stipe is going to be gone soon, they need some fresh contenders and they don't want to burn one of Tom Aspinall or Tai Tuivasa. They'd like both of them to be in the mix, if you know what I'm saying. I think they want both Tom Aspinall and Tai Tuivasa to rebound and then eventually fight each other for a belt, for a title elimination bout, who knows. But this is a gimme fight, I feel like. Marcin Tybura is good. He's tricky, but he gets hit so much by strikers that just aren't as good as Tom Aspinall. I want to make sure I'm getting this right because I'm fairly certain Marcin Tybura in his very last fight was like scraping by a win against Blagoy Ivanov, I think it was. Just going to double check that right now. I think it was Blagoy Ivanov. But he is 24-7 as a heavyweight. He was scraping by against Blagoy Ivanov. Barely getting by against Romanov as well. And he showed that he could be taken down early on. And arguably the only reason he won that fight was because of the altitude affecting Romanov. Because he completely gassed after the first round. But after we saw the Volkov matchup, maybe that's just what Romanov does. But Blagoy Ivanov was landing good shots on him. You know what I mean? I want to check up the stats real quick as well because he was getting he was going tit for tat with Romanov in a couple of those early rounds. I'm just going to check it right here. Round 3, he dominated with his grappling, but round 1, 22-12 in favor of Tybura. He won the first round clearly. Round 2 was 22-17 in favor of Ivanov. And Ivanov's a fat, slow old man who's unathletic. Tough, but unathletic. I don't think toughness is entirely necessary against Tybura because he's not much of a power puncher. I think it's going to be a technique matchup with Tom Aspinall. And that's just too much for Tybura. So I think Tom Aspinall is going to get a wicked first round finish, bounce back in style, and maybe we could rebook the Curtis Blades fight because there's going to be a bit of storyline behind it. Or maybe they're going to want to keep Curtis Blades around, I'm not sure, and maybe end up doing a Tom Aspinall versus Cyril Gane in Paris. That would be amazing. If he were to win in July and then they say, hey, we're doing an event in September, 3 months later, you said you wanted to be active, you took no damage against Tybura, Cyril Gane's looking to get back in there, let's do you two in a title elimination bout, that could also work. There are limitless opportunities here, but there's enough of few matchups I want to talk about. I'm going with Tom Aspinall here. We move on to some other really good matchups that have been signed. Arman Tsaryukyan versus who? Confusion of the highest order. Arman Tsaryukyan is signed to fight Joaquim Silva. So I guess literally no one wants to fight Arman Tsaryukyan in the lightweight division because there's no way they would make this matchup otherwise. There's no way. I believe like Joaquim Silva's number 39, number 49, an unranked section of the division. Like Arman Tsaryukyan's in the top 10. So just from being willing to take a fight, Joaquim Silva, who just beat Ricky Glenn, and before that was on a 2-fight losing streak, is getting a top 10 opponent just for taking a fight. And I'm glad this fight got made, because if it was this or not seeing Arman Tsaryukyan until October, I'll take this because I want to see him stay active while he's young. And this will be taking place on the 17th of June. I am going to be picking Arman Tsaryukyan to win. I think we're going to have to do a bit of unfair moving of the rankings. And I say unfair, let me know if you think it is or not. I mentioned this on stream a couple of days ago. If Arman Tsaryukyan wins this one, I get because he technically lost to Gamrot when in reality he should have won. He's still going to be below Gamrot in the rankings because it's not like Gamrot's on a losing streak. He just beat Jalin Turner, which is a really good win, number 10 in the world. So I think what should happen here is if Arman Tsaryukyan wins this one, him and Gamrot should move above Fiziev because RDA is not fighting at lightweight anymore. He's about to take his second fight at welterweight against Luke, a ranked contender in the welterweight division. I think it's time to remove RDA from the lightweight rankings, which will then diminish the probably only good win that Fiziev really has right now in the lightweight division. So I say move Fiziev down, move Gamrot up to number 6, Tsaryukyan up to number 7, and Fiziev down to like number 8. And maybe the winner of Jalin Turner versus Dan Hooker can take on Rafael Fiziev, and that would be an amazing striking matchup. So that's what I'm interested in seeing. We'll see if it takes place. There's a few other fights that have been announced as well. I'm just going to check over some of them. Lerone Murphy versus Joshua Kalibau. I've seen some people saying that Murphy ducked Nathaniel Wood, but Nathaniel Wood pulled out of a fight against Murphy, so I don't understand how that works. But apparently, Nathaniel Wood signed a contract for the date first, and then Lerone Murphy took a fight with Kalibau instead. I don't know what's going on. We wanted to see that clash, but I think the UFC wants to see a few more UK prospects win on the card rather than matching them off against each other to make a sort of UK versus the world type vibe to the card. But yeah, Lerone Murphy versus Josh Kalibau. I might go with Josh Kalibau because he's so dangerous, and I wasn't really a big fan of Murphy's performance against Santos. It was a very close fight that he arguably could have lost. So I probably will go with the wildness of Joshua Kalibau to eventually catch Lerone Murphy at a certain moment. And then another matchup that's been made is Nathaniel Wood versus Andre Fili. I'm going to have to go with Nathaniel Wood. Great matchup, though, in the featherweight division. The winner of this definitely should take the number 15 spot from Alex Caceres. But yeah, this is an amazing matchup. An amazing matchup. It's just that Andre Fili, in his recent fights, he's been not as impressive. He had like a few fights in a row where he looked really, really good. And I can't remember what fights they were. I think it was, even though he technically lost this one, it was the Daniel Pineda one. It was a no contest. But he looked really good in that fight. And then before that, he beat Charles Jourdain. He had a close fight with Sadiq Youssef. He had a close fight with Bryce Mitchell as well. And then he had a split decision. There's just so many split decisions. Whereas Nathaniel Wood is making like mockeries of fighters, I feel like, right now in the featherweight division. He had a close fight with Charles Jourdain, I think against a better version of Charles Jourdain than the one that Philly fought a few years ago. I'm going to be honest with you. But then he made Charles Rosa look absolutely silly in their fight as well. And that was his first fight in the featherweight division. You've given him some time to build himself up into the featherweight division, and now he's coming back against Andre Fili. And Andre Fili's kind of getting up there in age, 32. And this is like a Andre Fili 32 where he's been around for a very long time. I'm going to have to side with Nathaniel Wood here. I think he gets this one done by decision 30-27. Like and subscribe, Toodle Pip. I'll see you later. Goodbye. A bunch of fight announcements. I would have talked about Volkanovski Rodriguez, but we already knew that was going to be announced. Dana White literally went live with a big announcement to say, yeah, all these fights we announced ages ago, they're announced. It was weird. See you later. Goodbye.